Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened.
There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America.
Good night and good luck.
Hey everybody, it's Rick Wilson. I'm your host today on the Lincoln Project podcast. Welcome back. And once again, I want to say to everybody who has had such kind words about the last few broadcasts, just a big thank you to everybody. First, let me welcome Frances Berry. Frances has written a tremendous new book that I think is inspirational and optimistic. And, you know, we lack a little bit of optimism right now in our culture, I think, because our politics seem so dark. But the book is called Backroads and Better Angels. Frances, welcome to the Lincoln Project podcast. And I want to say, this is the kind of idea where you decided one day you were going to get on the road and get out into the country and see everything in an unvarnished way. Talk to us a little bit about your inspiration for writing the book, your background, and what led you to get in that RV and get on the road.
Sure. So I'm an opinion writer at Bloomberg. And in 2016, when the country seemed to be being torn apart at the seams by Donald Trump and what he was doing to that race, I was looking for a different way into the story and stumbled upon the Lincoln Highway, which is the nation's first transcontinental route. Dedicated in 1913, connects New York to San Francisco. Back then, there was no highway. There were barely any roads. And the idea was to stitch the country together using existing roads and encourage more road building. But of course, life took over, events overtook me. We never did the trip. Come 2020, pandemic happens. We're in the middle of a lockdown, my wife and I staring at each other inside our one-bedroom apartment and think, well, this is now or never. We got to do this because this is our chance. And so there had been a lot of books in that 4-year period and a lot of coverage about what is tearing America apart and how to explain red America to blue America and why we're so polarized. And I wanted to explore what holds us together as a country and to challenge both parties to see a little more of ourselves on the other side.
So as you got on the road, first off, were you a driver before? I mean, I asked this question of a lot of my New York friends, because a lot of them don't drive. Yeah. Did you hop in the RV for the first time and say, whoa, land yacht?
Completely, because I had never driven an RV before. I had no idea what I was. Complete rookie, and it was scary. I got in the driver's seat and thought, I bit off way more than I can chew here, but learned as we went. So we bought this RV used and had 30,000 miles on it. So Winnipeg, a 25-foot. It was the smallest RV we wanted to live in, and the biggest RV we wanted to drive. And my wife had also never driven or lived in an RV, but we said, okay, it's the pandemic. The world is collapsing. Let's go for it. And so it was all a new educational experience for us.
Right. So this is something that I talk to in the old days. I used to talk to my Republican friends about this, and my current iteration, I talk to my Democratic friends about this. And that is, if you live in Washington or you live in New York or you live in Boston or Los Angeles or San Francisco or Seattle, you believe that the country looks a lot like where you're from. And for Republicans, if you live in Orlando or Raleigh or Charlottesville or Nebraska or Omaha, you believe the country looks a lot like where you live. But it's really a much more patchwork nation, isn't it? It's really a much more weird amalgam than it is the strict red, strict blue division we play out in the media all the time.
Right. Completely. It doesn't really exist. And we saw that up close. And the beauty of driving the Lincoln Highway is that it's not a highway. So we weren't on the interstate. We were on local roads, zigzagging through small towns, went through big cities, but lots of small towns. We were on dirt roads at various points. And so saw all of that bleeding that you're talking about between red and blue in ways that give you a much, I think, healthier sense for the way in which, yes, the country is divided, but there's also an awful lot that you hear from both Democrats and Republicans when you talk to them. And one of them is how frustrated everybody is over the divisions. And that's something that I think Democrats tend to think they're the only ones who are frustrated. And that's not true. Republicans are also frustrated at the country now. Each kind of blames different causes for that. But that frustration runs really deep.
So that frustration, that division, when you're out in the country, how closely attuned are folks out in the country to the things that obsess the political class on Twitter and on the cable news every day? I think that's another thing where people in our culture, in the political culture, think, oh my God, of course everyone just heard about what the Senate Armed Services Committee did. And no one has, generally speaking. Talk to us about what you sense when you were talking to folks. I've always found in focus groups across the country and in talking to people, there's always been a sort of high-low to it. They sometimes shock you with how much they know, and other times you're like, they couldn't care less about the comings and goings of the political class.
Right. No, that's absolutely true. And we did not hear it. And that was part of the inspiration for the trip. Get out of the Beltway and get out of the daily news cycle, 24-hour news cycle, and speak to people about what matters to them, speak to them about national issues, but from a much more community and personal perspective. And you're right. People didn't really talk about Washington. That said, we were traveling in the fall of 2020. And so, of course, that looms over all of our conversations. I made a conscious effort to really not get into the 2020 race with a lot of people I spoke with, but it's always part of the backdrop. And it's what people also tend to gravitate to. Eventually, if you're having a political conversation, it's going to come around to Trump. But what I was trying to do is to talk about what holds us together. And so we left the first day of our trip. We left on 9/11. And the idea was to get to San Francisco by Election Day. So 9/11 being a day that united us like never before, and Election Day being a day that divided us like never before. And on the first day of the trip, I met with this mayor in Montgomery Township, New Jersey, Sadaf Jaffer. She was the first woman Muslim elected mayor in the country. And she talked about post 9/11, how important it was for the country and for her and for the Muslim community that President Bush defended Islam, said it was a religion of peace, and made sure that it was not acceptable to demonize Muslims in America. And I heard the same thing from an imam later on in the trip. We were in Iowa. The first mosque built in America is in Iowa. And he told almost the exact same story, that 9/11, everybody rallied around them. And then in recent years, that's fallen away and they've faced threats. But I thought, so part of the trip is connecting past history to present events. And one of the things that we did in between those two places was visiting South Bend, Indiana, where I sat down with President of Notre Dame, Reverend John Jenkins, Father John, and he talked about anti-Catholic bigotry from a century ago, when the KKK was huge in Indiana. And all of the xenophobia that and the Catholicism that the Catholics faced back then. Al Smith, but going back before that. And so this is not a new phenomenon. We have faced this before, and the challenge is always to find ways to overcome it, and also to learn from how we've overcome it in the past. And Lincoln, actually, who's really our North Star for the journey, provides lots of lessons in that regard. Never join the Know Nothings. When there was a riot against Catholics in Philadelphia in 1844, he helped adopt a resolution saying the Catholics have just as much of a right to practice their religion as Protestants. So, Lincoln there's still an awful lot we can learn from Lincoln that connects to our politics today.
Yeah, I think that I could not agree more with you on the continued relevance and validity of Lincoln as an inspiration and as a leader for the country, because he really did have I think, a a crisp insight into the sort of the American character then, and I think a lot of it has carried through. We've changed as a country a lot, but a lot of those insights have carried through of trying to build a sense of unity, trying to build a sense of concord, but also not tolerating, not pretending that both sides of a lie are valid, not pretending that some people aren't, a source of division and hostility. So as you're traveling across the country, you're talking to people. It's in the middle of COVID. You are experiencing a very different and changed nation. What was the thing though in that moment? And those were dark times. Those were dark times for the country. People were scared. People were angry. People were under tremendous economic stress. What was it that you heard consistently from people that gave you a sense of optimism in that journey? What was it even in that dark moment, what was lifting people up?
Right. So that dark moment was not just the pandemic and not just the economy. It was also the George Floyd protests and everything that surrounded that. So what I heard from people on both the left and the right again and again was, and this was incredibly affirming for me, faith in the country's resilience and faith in our values to carry us through this moment. So I mentioned this frustration that people were feeling and still are feeling, of course. And one of the tough parts about it was they didn't know what to do about it. Everyone feels a little helpless. How did this happen to us? Why are we here? And how do we get out of it? And not a lot of leaders offering tons of answers. And people feel a bit adrift. But they haven't lost that sense of faith in the country. And there's this belief, I really believe this because I heard it everywhere we went. There's this faith that we can get through this, that we will get through it, because this is what we do. And the truth of the matter is that is the most historically correct assessment you could possibly come up with, because the whole history of the country is struggle and conflict over our values and how we apply them. And that's the nature of being an American, is to engage in these conversations. And for the most part, we've been able to avoid violence, but not always. And that's another reason, of course, why Lincoln becomes so instrumental in the story.
Let me ask you another question about the sort of flavor of the country. I was talking to a friend the other day, a German friend the other day, who speaks perfect English, very sophisticated person, known her 30 years, and she's about to make her first trip to the U.S. And she's like, what I'd really like to do is see the weirdest things. I really would like to see like how weird America really is. I mean, well, you started in Florida, obviously, but I think there's something about the American character, and I want to see if you spotted this on the road in the same way. We are a country with some pretty delightful eccentricities. We're a weird place. That I think our culture and I feel bad for us in some ways because we've been so dark for a while, but there is a lot of weird and whimsical stuff out there, right? Well, what was the thing that on the road you were like, this is classic Americana right here?
Oh, I mean, there was a lot, and I couldn't agree more. And it does reflect the American spirit. In Pennsylvania, the Lincoln Highway goes by the shoe house, built by the nation's leading shoe retailer in the 1940s, Mulholland Haynes. And he wanted to sell shoes. What better way to do it than to build a house in the shape of a shoe? And then he would hold a contest and people could stay there, honeymooners could stay there, and he'd get lots of press for it. And it was a big thing. And he said, when he came up with the idea, he said to an architect, he handed him a boot and he said, build me a house like this. So there were other things like that. We saw the world's largest gnome. I mean, this is part of the beauty of the American spirit, that there's the freedom to do these absurd things, and Americans love them. We passed an old gas station gas station had been made out of dinosaur bones that they had dug up in Wyoming. I mean, there's really Your German friend has a lot to explore.
She's very excited about the whole thing. She's been. It's like one of these weird things that like she studied it probably more, like she's probably got a graduate level expertise now on Weird America, because that's the goal of her trip. So, we always look at America traditionally in this division, essentially between North and South. That was our brain space for the American experience for a long time. But you were journeying east to west. And having spent time in the West in California and Washington and Oregon and Utah and Montana, it's a different culture. When did you see, at what point in your drive did you feel like those transitions between East and West in America?
I'd say we probably felt them pretty early as we moved into rural Western Pennsylvania, actually.
Wow. Okay.
But especially so as we got, the further west we went, I guess the more pronounced it got. And that became especially true as we got onto Bureau of Land Management land. And we, after we ended up off the Lincoln Highway, we spent a day with ranchers in Arizona who told us about the struggles of running a ranch when you're constantly dealing with the government.
Sure.
And we felt lots of empathy for that. Anyone who's dealt with the government, with government bureaucracy, it's a headache. And most of us don't have to do it on a daily basis. But if you're running a business that does, then you can understand the frustration. And the rancher spoke about how an Obama EPA rule had made their life more difficult and how it went away under Trump. And all of that's the stuff we should be arguing about, right? That's really healthy debate. And as long as we can have those arguments about an EPA regulation or marginal tax rates or anything else, that's where we want to be as a country. There's a story in Nevada that connects to this because we passed through Austin, Nevada, which is what they call a living ghost town, about 500 people.
Yep.
And there's the Lincoln adjacent story that I love, that in 1864, there was a mayoral election there, and Civil War is going on, and a Democrat and a Republican voter make a bet. And they say, well, if your candidate, the losing candidate, has to march through town carrying a sack of flour while a band serenades them to the winning team's song. And so if the Democrat lost, he was going to have to listen to John Brown's Body, a battle hymn of the Republic. And if the Republican lost, he was going to have to listen to Dixie. And while they carry the sack of flour through town. So the Republican lost. What did he do? He accepted defeat. He carried the sack of flour through town as the band played Battle Hymn of the Republic. And at the end of the parade, they auctioned off the sack of flour to raise money for the U.S. Sanitary Commission, which was supporting Union soldiers. So here, I think you've got two roles that are crucial to democracy. One is the gracious loser, and two is the aisle crosser, someone who is willing to extend a hand in support of national unity, even when members of their own party are not willing to do so.
I think that's one of the things that we fundamentally, I think January 6th made a lot of people remember it, but I think we had kind of lost touch with the fact that one of the great things about America, one of the great aspects of America, is that for 240 plus years, we had a peaceful transition of power. That two men who disagreed with each other on every possible aspect in many cases shook hands, and one left and one came in. And I think that's right. That idea of the gracious loser is something that doesn't make America weak. It makes America strong to have people who are willing to understand that and willing to acknowledge that fact. You mentioned another thing that I think is, and I've been asked this question a lot since I came out against Trump back in 2015. It's like, what do you miss? about our politics. What do you miss about that? I'm like, I want us to have fights where we scream and yell and throw things at each other over whether we're going to have a 33.8% marginal tax rate at the top or a 34.2% marginal tax rate at the top. I want to argue if it's going to be 415 parts per billion of carbon or 317 parts per billion of carbon. I want to argue about all those things. Yep. I want to get in fights about those things because at the end of the day, Americans want things to happen. They want us to do big things again.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something we heard all over the country. One story, we were down at the Mexican border, and I did a ride along with on the border with the sheriff's office. And in Cochise County, southeastern Arizona, conservative area. And the sheriff said, we were watching the wall being built, cranes, construction cranes, the whole thing. And he said, I know that the wall is not going to solve everything. We need a balanced security plan with cameras and staffing and all of that. Mm-hmm. But a wall can play a role in population centers to push illegal crossings to other areas. But he also said, but we also need more immigration. We have to make it easier to come here. The whole system is broken, and Democrats and Republicans are both to blame, and neither side is willing to meet in the middle and pass a sensible, comprehensive bill that would solve this problem. That's a bit. You talk about doing big things. That's a really big thing, and we've been failing to do it for 20 years now. I think 90% of Americans would agree with him. This is something we absolutely need to do. The fact that we haven't has caused huge problems down there, and it's our own fault. It's a dysfunction in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, and I do blame both sides. I hate doing both sidesism, but both sides have incentives to not do anything on it. And that incentive structure is terrible. It's a terrible incentive structure to have as a country. And you know, I'd actually already, it's been 40 years since Reagan did an immigration bill, which by today's standards, Republicans their brains would explode if they read the text of that bill. But you know, we are a propositional nation, though. I mean, there is a lot of layer and nuance and complexity to immigration in this country, where you know some of the people that are like, wait, seal it up, we're done, are first and second generation Hispanics who came here and naturalized or became U.S. citizens. And I mean, I've seen it in the polling. They're like, no, those people coming now, no, not those guys. We're the good ones, not those guys. It's crazy how that issue has wrapped itself around so much.
Yeah, I totally. But what's more American than that? We've been pulling up the ladder behind us for forever. You know, every wave of immigrant wants to stop. Doesn't matter where they're from. Wants to stop the next ones from coming in. That's part of our story.
When my German ancestors came to this country in the 1820s, they were the scum of the earth, and then the Irish were the scum of the earth, and then the Italians were the scum of the earth, and the Jews were the scum of the earth, and the Hispanics were. It goes on and on and on through our society, where there's the new ones are oh my God, they'll never integrate, they'll never be the same, they'll never be like us, and you know. One of my favorite American stories, I live in Tallahassee, Florida, not exactly a bustling metropolis. And I was in a Publix grocery store one afternoon, and I see a Korean woman, and I have, you know, a couple hundred words of Korean. I speak just tourist Korean, right? And she's talking in Korean, and I said, hey, how are you? Good day. And her daughter looks up and goes, Mama, was that man speaking Korean? In her little, perfect little Korean girl, in her Southern honey accent. And I was like, that's America right there. That's America in such a profound way. And it's like, you know, you catch those moments. That's one of those things that makes me, you know, I see that the propositional nature of America in your book. I see that people, they still get that we're an idea, not just a people, not just a race or anything else. They still feel like there's an idea of America out there.
That's right, and I do think that is at the base of the faith that people have in our resilience, because they do believe in those ideas. We do believe in those ideas, and as long as we can keep arguing over them peacefully, we'll be in good shape.
So before we wrap up, I want to ask you, who was the one person you met on the road who gave you the most hope for the future of the country?
That's a great question, because we met lots of people who gave us hope. I thought I had a particularly great conversation with a woman in Northwest Indiana who was a volunteer at a abortion clinic. And it was extremely contentious trying to get it built, lots of opposition. But when they opened it, she invited members of the opposition over to her home, a few of them, to sit down and talk. Mm-hmm. And she was telling me this story, and she, did it in hopes that they might find some common ground. And they totally failed. There was no common ground. But she realized, you know what, that's okay, because something else came out of it. They realized they liked each other, and they began developing a relationship. And they kept talking, and they kept meeting. And they even wrote an op-ed together for their local newspaper, the South Bend Tribune, in which they said, they recounted this work, and they said, we have to be able to prioritize the relationship over the politics. And I think that is so important. And it's something that I think all of us, can learn from. And at a time when relationships are getting torn apart on Facebook and Twitter and everything else, it's so easy to lose sight of the fact that we've got to be able to and that requires listening, requires open mind. It's hard work. It's not just stuff that comes naturally to us. It requires a deliberate effort. But I found that story to be really powerful.
Well, I want to say thank you so much to Francis Berry for coming on the Lincoln Project podcast today. Francis, I really appreciate you, and I appreciate the book. Folks, the book is Backroads and Better Angels, A Journey into the Heart of American Democracy. It is in the great tradition of road books in this country, Backroads and Blue Highways and things like that. You will love this book, and it will give you some hope. And I know we have a little bit of a hope deficit right now in the country. So I really encourage you to take a look at it. Francis, thank you so much for coming on the show. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks very much.
Good night and good luck.